Aloha and welcome back to another Maestros Vibe. That's right. We are back here. My name is Juan Espinal and I'm super stoked to be back here on the microphone, here on location in the community for a special Community Corner episode. Now, here at Maestros Vibe, you know that we're always bringing a powerful and impactful message. We're trying to bring educators together, bring the classroom to the community. We're trying to instill legislative change, empower our communities, and make positive impact for the future in our keiki. It's something that really matters to us here at Maestros Vibe, and I am beyond honored, stoked, and humbled to be here and be able to have an opportunity to share in this message, something that our special co-host for the next 3 episodes here, we both and everyone here in this room believed was important. We are here to talk about water. Now, while I take a quick sip of water, I needed to introduce our highly esteemed co-host who joins us here today. And I'll pass the microphone over to you, Rae.
Aloha, Juan. Mahalo nui for bringing us together. My name is Rae, or Rhiannon Tereari'i Chandler Iao. I am the executive director of Waiwai Ola, and it is actually a organization in transition. We are formerly known as Waiwai Ola Waterkeepers Hawaiian Islands, and we are currently known as Waiwai Ola Ohana, which is the collection of all of the efforts that we have done statewide and are so excited to talk about today. All of that has to do with water, fishable, swimmable, drinkable water. And we're going to be talking stories about it for the next 3 episodes. I'm so excited.
We're going to be learning a lot more about all of your work, Rae. We appreciate you being here, an expert who's been working in the state, thinking and learning and growing. And speaking of someone who's been thinking and learning and growing, we have got a special guest, a student all the way from Hilo here in this special place in Kona, which we'll be sharing more about soon. You will learn more about why we're here on location in this special place. But I would like to take a moment and pass that microphone over to our special guest, Darrian. Welcome to the show.
Mahalo, Juan. Mahalo for having us here. My name is Darrian Muraoka. Aloha mai. I am originally from Kauai, and I am a student at the University of Hawai'i at Hilo in the TCBES program. That's the Tropical Conservation, Biology, and Environmental Science program in the internship track. And I'm so honored to have Rae as my mentor here for these 2 years. It's been 2 years. Yay.
So, Rae, you've been a mentor for you, Darrian, for 2 years now.
Yes, very exciting. Darrian's a graduate student, so it's not too much mentorship. It's really an honor to work with her.
And maybe you want to just share a little bit about how's that partnership been for you? A powerful 2 years learning.
Yes, it's been a powerful tool, Juan. And, we've been just getting started, COVID hit, the pandemic it took a big toll on all of us. However, we got to learn just how powerful we are within our nonprofit worlds. We got to learn how to work together as both partners and within our community. And we also got to learn from each other, and we're still learning from each other. And it's just been extraordinary.
Absolutely. I would love to. I wish we had more time to talk about the 2-year journey. COVID really shifted, I think, a lot of the things that we had planned initially, but it gave us an opportunity to dive deeper in other areas, in our personal research, in our water quality work, directly in the community, in our tiny bubble of ourselves and Dr. Rick, which we'll talk about later. But it was such an honor, really, to get to know, I think, the community a little bit better. When the tourists left, we had a little bit more access to some of the areas, that we have been monitoring over time, and it was nice to see the changes. I think it's interesting because it's like, the water could be so much healthier if we manage things differently. We got to see a lot of things when tourism kind of paused and came back. But I think that they've given us opportunities to make changes that our islands are really asking for, and along the way, that data that we've gotten from water quality has been really helpful. As Darrian mentioned, in our partnership with the county and other governmental agencies that are responsible for water quality and public health. And so working with them, I think having more time to work with them because we have not, as many events and things going on, that has opened up a lot of potential, I think, going forward in the areas of wastewater and stormwater and some of the exciting things we're going to be talking about today.
I agree with you. I feel like COVID did change a lot of plans, and it gave us an opportunity that was unique. And I think it's what makes this opportunity here in this community space so special to me. I mean, this is something that I had dreamed of, to come together, have these important conversations, because they really do matter. And especially when we think about our islands, absent of tourism. I mean, it's something that is intertwined. It's something that will forever be intertwined, I believe. But what does it all mean for our land here? And it is something that is probably changing regularly. It's something that we're getting to understand more regularly. And sometimes it's not really that fun to get to know it, I think. I think sometimes when you really take a step back and get to know things, can be a little bit uncomfortable.
I agree. Yeah. I think it exposed some things, that we were not ready yet to talk about, because COVID created an opening that we'd never seen before. I mean, I remember, going to beaches on Maui and on Oahu that I had never been to when they were empty. Like I was the only person there, or maybe one other local family. And these are beaches that have literally hundreds of people on them, and you can't even put your towel down, And so to see and remember these places and go on trails that I hadn't gone on because there was usually so many tourists there that you just wouldn't even chance it. It was almost dangerous. There's so many people on the trail, and to go back to these places and in just a short amount of time. I mean, Kahalu'u Bay is an example. And Auntie Cindy Punihale's work down there, she could see the regeneration of the coral just in the very short time that the tourists had stopped coming, right? And in that just few months, coral had started to come back, and that the fishes had come back with the coral, and we don't think, I think we don't think about the impact that we're making on the environment, and what that is when you amplify it into literally the millions, the millions of people who come to Hawaii, and what impact that has on forests and on beaches and on our waters, and so I think it gave us an opportunity to say, oh, wait a minute, okay, so look at all that regeneration that took place, so what can we do? And for example, I know Auntie Cindy, in that time, she was like, well, let's change the direction that the people come into the water. Let's have more organization, and so less trampling, and so some of those adjustments, were made possible by COVID. And I would say they're a little bit of the silver lining, of what was really continues to be a difficult situation. But here in Hawaii, I think it gave us an opportunity to think about environmental management, and an opportunity to see the restoration or the species coming back. And I think that's one thing. As a person who's worked on restoration, we have native oyster projects and native limu projects that we have worked on statewide, and it's really you have to believe that these things can come back, right? Mm-hmm. And when you start, you're not sure that they will or can. The odds are so incredibly stacked against us. I think when we talk about the orders of magnitude of water quality and pollution issues that we have, and people issues that we have, but then instead, when you get this break and you see so much recovery in such a short time. It's like a reminder that if we just give nature just a little bit of a chance, or even better yet, assist nature just a little bit, that we can see this fabulous recovery. And I think that's why, the work that Darrian does is so motivating to me. The work that we do with students in schools and the storm drain stenciling work that she does, because it's really about not giving up. It's about saying, hey, maybe it doesn't have to go like this. Maybe it doesn't have to just all go into a storm drain and then all go into the bay or the river. There are subtle things that we can do to participate in, the recovery. Because I think if we reduce the pollution, we can give Hilo Bay a chance, to come back and see what a phenomenal resource I know that it is. If we would just kind of reduce a little bit of the human issues that are compromising it.
And that's something that is unique to here in Hawaii. And to our listeners and to our viewers here island-wide, nationwide, worldwide, please know this is a message that I think is very, very pertinent to us here on this island. But we also hope that you can extrapolate this information and take it wherever you do live, because this is information that I do believe is important for anyone, anywhere. And Darrian, I really want to dig into just some of the studying you've been doing, because it is something that is not maybe something a lot of people think about, which Rae, you were mentioning, which is our storm drains.
Yes, that's correct. And I think within this past 2 years, there have been a lot of thinking of what we can do within this project. But for the first 2 years, I really wanted to deepen my pilina, or my connection with Hilo. And so with that, it was all about learning mo'olelo. It was about connecting with community. It was about actually going out into the community and doing volunteer work. It really deepened the connection that I had with the neighbors that, walks around, and the fishermen that also just have their own grounds. But when there was tourism, a lot of people were just swamping to the beaches and kind of going through those fishing grounds. But once that had that pause, as Rae was saying, it was like, oh, how are you doing, baby girl? It was, what are you doing today? How is our water today? And with that pilina, with that connection, it's that start of that Pono Science. It's that start of what can we do for the people that live here? It's love, it's aloha. And so with this project, it has 3 parts. One part was to monitor the rivers. So our 3 main rivers of Hilo, which was Wailoa, Honoli'i, and Wailuku. And we got to see the flow. Thank you to Andrew Hara for doing all of those rivers and just extrapolating all of this amazing imagery and videos. But we got to really see our rivers flow. And I think that's where, we got to see what's going on within our watershed. How are our native and also invasives contributing to riparian erosion, or just erosion in general within Hilo, and what is going into our water when reaching those residential, industrial, and businesses within downtown Hilo or within Keaukaha. And so that was one part of our project. The second part of the project was also water quality sampling within Hilo. So we had, I think it was 5 sites, Rae, and we would actively go to collect water samples within those sites. And within those sites, we were finding little traces of mercury, lead, legacy pollution. However, that was also how our pilina had started too. We have all of this legacy pollution, but it takes our legacy within this baseline to keep it going, to make sure that our community in Hilo is safe when they're recreating, paddling, fishing, and also surfing. The last part of the project is outreach and education. So within storm drain stenciling, it's very important. It's used as an awareness tool. So some Waiakea high school students and we went around to observe the storm drains. So we took valuable data before we even storm drain stenciled. So we got to take pictures of the storm drain. We got to see if it already had pollution within it, if it was natural pollution and just grass rising from the storm drains, or if it was humans contributing to these pollutions in the storm drains. And there have been like pieces of cigarettes, there's pieces of trash, and we got to observe a lot of that. And so our next steps within Volunteer Week is to go back and observe those storm drains and storm drain stencil. All drains lead to the ocean. Yeah. Or all drains lead to waterways, which is very important, you know. And people can physically see the detriments of their pollution to our water once maybe they won't pollute anymore. And it also gives the students a chance to do hands-on volunteering for Earth Month and for everyday uses. We always pass these storm drains, but we never see the impacts that we are creating within our waterways just because of that indirect connection that we don't see every day. But those are our 3 big parts of our project for my graduate program.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And when you mentioned storm drain stenciling, you are specifically talking about stenciling on a storm drain, like just to give people an image, like what, and we'll try and get an image of this, and actually we'll have a lot of exciting opportunities to share more if this is interesting, and you want to get your hands on, because so it's just stencil on the actual storm drain, and it says all
drains lead to waterways. Yes. And
wow.
I think it's important to also highlight the work before even getting to the storm drains. Working with Department of Public Works, they have a lot going on too. So you want to make sure, like, as a student, you're being as respectful as possible of their time. And it was a couple of months that we had to work with them. And I'm pleased to have worked with who I did, because she was on it. She was like, I can get you these permits, just give me the maps. And so we kind of had this ongoing conversation of, okay, where do you want a storm drain stencil? Okay, I can have it here, but we're not sure if the storm drains actually do lead to these waterways. So it was a constant, add, delete, but also creating that connection with them is very important, because once we got those permits to storm drain stencil, now it was the students' turn to do their work. And I think it's powerful, because we just go to the storm drains that we observed that are on our maps for our permit, and we just storm drain stencil all drains lead to waterways. And there are people passing and wondering what we're doing, but that's the next connection that we need to make. That's our big pilino with each other that we need to make. And just making that connection for Earth Month is making an impact already.
Maybe y'all can help me, and I know you all know a lot more about water than I do. So is it difficult to map where water goes? That's a complex thing?
Yeah, I don't think anybody can confidently say that they know exactly where water goes. And Dr. Rick would be a great person to talk to about that, especially because the hydrology under the surface is different in every community, depending on the geology of that area. And so I think it's interesting also, though, that people take their information regionally where they come from, and they apply it to the next place. Like, every place might be similar, and in fact they're different. And so one thing that we ran into and what caused this issue to come to our attention was when we were first starting to make a waterkeeper organization. We were talking with folks And somebody had commented to me that they recently saw somebody in the Kona Costco parking lot putting their used motor oil down the storm drain. And that is a common practice of the past. Like, I'm aware of people putting storm drain, used motor oil down the storm drain. And I think it's just a really sad kind of misunderstanding about how storm drains work, and maybe, people in the past not understanding that could be harmful. And in other cities, perhaps there are combined systems in the sewer where it leads to the storm drain and the sewer come together, and it goes to some kind of treatment plant. And so maybe people think, oh, it's going to get treated before it goes out, but that is not the case in Hawaii anywhere that I'm aware of. In fact, if you put used motor oil down the storm drain, then it's probably going to go straight to a river and then to the ocean. Or in Kona, it's going to go straight down into the groundwater probably and then out into the ocean. Either way, it's a horrible scenario that we don't want to have happening. And so on the off chance that people are under the impression that storm drains lead to some kind of filtration or cleaning or treatment system, then it's important to label the storm drain just for that reason. But then, on the other hand, the fact that, we're all sort of participating in this non-point source pollution, you can't point to it. You can't say somebody's putting their used motor oil down the storm drain, but still, as Darrian mentioned, heavy metals and other particles are making it out into the water. And how is that happening, right? It's happening because collectively we're all leaving sort of our pollution on the surface, from our cars, like any kind of leaking oil that might be coming out of our cars. Cadmium dust comes every time we hit the brakes. These things are on the surface of the road, along with fertilizers that come from our yards, any kind of pesticides that might be running off from anywhere where they were applied. All of these things are kind of coming into this rainwater soup every time it rains really hard, and they all come together into this mixture, and this mixture just starts rolling down the hill, like wherever it gets, and picking up everything in its pathway until it finds a drain that it can hit and then go into usually a river if you're in Hilo, and then out into Hilo Bay. And so sadly, Hilo Bay just gets pummeled, like just over and over and over with every rainstorm, bringing this kind of pollution to the bay. Hilo rain, which is so famous, think about what that means, right?
There's a lot of music about it. If you don't know, we're talking about a lot of potential opportunities for the water to become more and more contaminated. That's right. I think that might be related to what you were mentioning about some of that repair that we started to see when there was less going on.
Well, and that's another factor. And, we are not at all against tourism. I think I'll speak for myself and say that, I recognize what a role that tourism is plays in our economy, as well as other ways that our economy is assisted by things like agriculture, and even the military. Everything in Hawaii plays an important role in the economy somehow, and I'm not saying that we don't want to have tourism. That's not even possible for us. We've you should see what happened to us when tourism stopped. I think the governor announced that we have a recession for 5 years because of 6 months of not having tourism, right? So we're not advocating that the tourists don't come. I think what we're saying is there's a lot of impact, and how are we going to manage the impact? And just what you said, Juan, it's not only about our cars on the road. There are tourist cars on the road too, right? If we have 10 million tourists visiting Hawaii a year, how many of them have a vehicle, right? How much of that pollution is adding to the things that we see in the storm and in stormwater and then later in the nearshore waters? And so it's really a broad conversation about community issues But in Hawaii, our community is made up of everybody, right? Who's here, and it could be visitors, and residents, and the people who make these decisions. And so Darrian's project is really important because it's really about bringing attention to an issue. As you mentioned, Hilo rain. We're famous for our rain. But we don't think about what that rain does, when it's kind of rolling around on the surface and percolating into the bay of all places.
Because it makes me kind of feel sad and bad for storm drains, poor storm drains. They are intended for storm, correct? Yes. I mean, and they are just kind of, unfortunately, in the middle of this situation.
Yes, that's correct. And it was interesting too when I was taking a land management and planning class within Hilo, downtown Hilo. No one really knows what happened between the planning and environmental science within it. However, downtown Hilo is actually an estuary, so it's prone to flooding. And when we get those big rain events, we see those flooding, and we don't really think about the storm drains anymore. We think about, oh my gosh, what are we walking in? There are still people that walk through the floods just to get to their businesses or get to their homes. So we can storm drain stencil, and that's one of the most important awareness tools we can have right now. However, how do we get everyone involved in this conversation of what's going to happen with Hilo and climate change?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, that is such a great segue to, the broader implications of the storm drain work. And really, I think it's about taking steps where you can, right? As a nonprofit or as a community, we can't solve, all problems, or even, maybe there are big things that are outside of our control. But some things are within our control, like the things that we are introducing into the watershed, as Darrian mentioned, that some of that fertilizer, that's coming off of our storm drains and into our storm drains from our yards are things that we've applied, right, and to our yards. And so not over applying fertilizers, not using pesticides and herbicides if you don't have to, doing things that we can to protect our driveways and putting things down so that we're not leaking oil directly on the road, under our cars. If we know our cars leak, putting something underneath them to catch that. There's a variety of ways that we individually can make changes to lessen our collective impact. And those are things that are within our control. So when you talk about climate change, we have very little control. Sadly, as Hawaii, as islands, we are not the biggest generators of greenhouse gases. We are the recipients of the impacts of climate change, right? No matter what we do, we're counting on those who are in control of greenhouse gases to make better choices. But in the interim, we are making choices over what we can have control over, which is what we do in our watershed. And that, knowing that climate change is going to bring great storms, huge superstorms, and the kind of flooding that we haven't seen before. I mean, for example, Hurricane Lane just a few years ago, I think there was 50 inches of rain in Hilo in a day or 2 days or something. It broke a record. I mean, it was incredible. And so that's the kind of saturation that we know that we're going to get in these storms, because the wetter areas are projected to get wetter in climate change and the drier areas are projected to get drier. And so we're on notice as a wet area that more water is coming. And so we have to do a better job as a community of how we manage the flow of water, both in our yards and more collectively as a city, the county. What are we doing to control things like storm drains and settling basins, and implement maybe great ideas like bioswales or other areas where floodwaters can settle on grass and percolate into the ground instead of rushing out into the ocean full of all of the pollution that it's carrying. Which is what a lot of channelization does. Anytime you concrete an area, you're just kind of creating a superhighway for the pollution to get out there. And I think there are steps we can take locally that will kind of address the things that climate change are going to bring us. You know, we can't change climate change, but we can definitely make better choices.
And Darrian, that relates to what you were mentioning, how you all found this pollutant in some of the work that you were doing and some of the studying that you were doing. And I think some powerful words that are kind of resonating with me are, I believe you mentioned legacy.
Yeah, legacy pollution.
Legacy pollution.
Yeah, and sadly, that's Hilo's story, is legacy pollution. You know, that's a little bit where we started. There used to be a Canic factory on Hilo Bay, and a lot of arsenic came off of that and is now embedded in the substrate of Hilo Bay, so much so that arsenic is detectable in the seaweed because it's growing out of that, you know, that soil and that substrate at the bottom of the ocean now. And really, if you talk about soil belongs in the forest. But if you look at our rivers, when it rains super hard, it's like chocolate brown, and that's not the right color for water. That means that there's way too much turbidity, way too much sediment coming from our forests going down into the ocean, and that means it's transporting you know, all of the soil that's eroding from areas usually where ungulates are. And so pigs, goats, sheep, eating the forest, eating the native plants, they'll expose roots. And then when a big rain comes, all of that newly exposed dirt will get washed into the nearest waterway. And so forestry and forest management plays a very large role in the health of our watershed. And when all that soil is headed down the rivers and into Hilo Bay, it's just building up this foundation at the bottom of the bay. You know, the substrate or the benthic level is getting this kind of hypertoxic soil because the soil is now accumulating the pollution, you know, that's also in the water.
That's related, you said saturation, right?
The saturation. And so now you've got sand, soil, you know, as like a sink for like arsenic and, you know, other heavy metals that are coming down with the pollution. So there's legacy arsenic. There's even legacy pesticides, you know, that are used from the plantation history. That Hilo certainly was a large plantation community before. And so some of the pesticides, in fact, you know, that are related to pineapple and sugar plantations have a very long life and can be detectable decades after they were applied, you know. And so we have some legacy pollution, and then we have some very contemporary anthropogenic sources of pollution, as Darrian mentioned, human-made pollution that's coming down every single time there is a large storm event. And so those are the ones that we have more control over. And arsenic is a big concern. You know, it's being in our seaweed. That is the food chain, right? So the fish are eating the seaweed, the big fish eat the small fish, and then now we have to worry about the fish we're eating. And so, Darrian, do you want to share a little bit about the work that you're doing with the fish pond and how all of this sort of relates to water quality?
Yeah, and first of all, I wanted to also give a mahalo to the local i'a that I was able to even collect this data from. So within the past 2 weeks, I've been working with Lanakila Learning Center, which is a center that is associated with Hilo High School. And they do a lot more hands-on learning for their kids. And so I was able to give presentations about the watershed, why Hilo's watershed is important and what we can do now. And with that, I was able to do some Pono Science or research within Kaumaui, which is Hui Ho'ole Mauluo's site, one of their 2 fish ponds that they have at the end of Keaukaha. And so with that, we were able to test the turbidity within the makaha to see just how great those particles are turbulent and if the sun is doing its job, and it was doing very, very good. We were also able to check the the pH of the water, and it was perfect as well. And so next, what we're about to do is we had the students fish for a little while and throw their nets in the local i'a. And so I was able to take some tissue samples of those fish, and it was mullet and also the invasive tilapia. And those invasive tilapias are huge. So with those tissues, we will run them within the lab to see if there is any lead, mercury, or arsenic that are within those tissues, just to make sure that we have baseline data for Kaumaui to see if the fish ponds can raise fish stocks for the community. And I think that's a big step in the direction that we want to go, because we want to keep providing for our community and show our kids that this is not just within our generation, it's for their generation as well.
Because we will be leaving this legacy with the next generation, whatever that is, no matter what. Our time here is finite. And sometimes that's a difficult thing for me to wrestle with. But I guess that's what makes moments like this, where we can come together, we can comment on this, we can bring this to our audience and let them know about this important work. Because I don't know about you all, but it just made me thirsty for a drink of clean water. And it made me realize how interconnected everything truly is. So if you want a clean drink of water, you really have to think about everything from your storm drains to that actual faucet. Darrian, I really appreciate you joining us here in our first episode. Now, while our time here as well is finite, and I did want to give you an opportunity, just thinking about what we've been sharing here in this small circle. Is there anything that you take away from this conversation that you'd like to share with us all?
Of course. And I think about it every day within this project, within my personal life. But Earth Day and Earth Month isn't just a month or a day. It's every day. And also, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And I think I wrestle with those questions every day, because I want to make sure that for the next generation, we have all of those resources that make Hawaii Hawaii for them, because we are gonna take off, and we're gonna leave what our legacy is for them. And so that's all I can say. If not us, then who? And if not now, then when? Thank you, Juan.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And that really just makes you think, because it is all about now. And Rae, thinking about right now, and thinking about our listeners. I mean, we've been talking a lot about Hawaii and what's been going on, but maybe you wanted to share just a little tiny bit for our listeners about our upcoming special guest, perhaps, or maybe we keep it under wraps, because we're talking about someone who's been doing some very important work throughout this community. So maybe you want to share just a little bit.
Sure. I want to, I think, maybe weave it all together to say that Darrian is such an inspiration. And I feel like this conversation really highlights what one person can do with their work, and that what one person's work can do for a community. And Darrian is really a part of a legacy of Dr. Rick, that, and we're going to be talking with Dr. Rick later, but Dr. Rick has imparted his knowledge into a number of individuals, and Darrian is one of them, that this knowledge then goes out and continues to serve our community and invite our community to participate and to be a part of the solution, right? That it's not only about us doing that work, it's about us inspiring the need, for the work, and then the action that comes together, just to solve some of these problems. I think that we all have a collective kuleana, whether we recognize it or not. We are all impacting our environment. and we are definitely all part of the solution. And so it's really an honor to see how all of these pieces come together, and to be able to talk about them with you, Juan, as we talk about Earth Day and Earth Week and Volunteer Week, and then also kind of put that into the larger, as Darrian put it, the bigger takeaway is really it's not a day and it's not a week, so we can kind of zoom in on some of the exciting things we have going on, but zoom out into the personal responsibility of like, we have to keep this going because we have a lot of work to do, I think, for our community.
Absolutely. This is just the beginning. Darrian, huge mahalo for joining us here in our introductory Community Corner episode. We've got plenty coming at you. If you want to get involved with some of these action items, please know in the coming weeks we'll be sharing a little bit more about what you can do. But if you want a sneak peek, check out the description. There's a website. You'll be able to click on that and find some areas where you can start getting involved. But again, we'll be sharing more information about that. As we move forward, we just wanted to remind our viewers, you might recognize this special space a little bit more with our special guest coming up on our next episode. And if you want to check out what we're doing on video a little bit more, we encourage you to follow our YouTube channel. And if you'd like to join us even more, go ahead and support our Patreon page, which is in the description as well. Ladies and gentlemen, our community members, I just wanted to give you a huge mahalo as we say a hui ho on this episode of Maestros Vibe.
Mahalo. A hui ho.
Good job. Woo!
My attention was riveted.
Yay! Wow! From the man himself.